But first to another infrastructure project that's not only behind schedule, but is looking like it might never be completed. Australia's Inland Rail project, which in principle is very worthwhile to get a new freight line to connect Victoria and Queensland, well, it's being held up by political infighting, poor management and, as always, environmental approvals. Originally slated to be completed by 2027 at a cost of just over $9 billion, it's now blown out to beyond $31 billion, and no guarantees it'll ever actually cross the line from New South Wales into Queensland. Joining me now is the man who basically created this project when in government, but of course now they're in opposition, Shadow Veterans Minister Barnaby Joyce. Barnaby, I know how passionate you have been most of your political life in the Senate, then obviously in the lower house about the Inland Rail. What on earth has gone wrong? Because as I explained to people, it is such a good project, at least in its inception.
Dead right, Peter. Right back to the time I was in the Senate, I remember talking to an infrastructure minister when the Labor government was in. His name was Anthony Albanese, and explaining to him how important this was. And he said, well, you know, maybe after 2018 we'd look at it. Bill Shorten said it was a good idea. But when we had the coalition agreement with Malcolm Turnbull, Malcolm wanted the Western Sydney Airport, and I said, well, if you get Western Sydney Airport for a coalition agreement, I want the Inland Rail for regional people. Now, this is great for Melbourne, great for Brisbane, but it also grows towns such as Narrabri, Parkes, Goondiwindi. It becomes a corridor of commerce, an impetus to further growth, a reason for people to move their warehouses, their factories out into regional areas and give other people a reason to move into regional areas rather than just stack themselves one on top of the other in Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane. But what we've got from the Labor Party is this flying incompetence. It always starts with a review where they mimic me from Austin Powers and say, this is going to cost $31 billion. Well, prove it. How'd you come up with that number? Where'd that number fall out of the tree from? But what we have now, Peter, we have an inland rail that goes from, wait for it, Melbourne to Parkes, and a little bit up to Narromine, and then we have another one that goes from Newcastle to, here's a quiz, where is it? North Star. Heard of North Star? Well, it goes to a village called North Star. Now, it's supposed to go over there, to Brisbane. That's where it's supposed to go. But I don't know what's at North Star. I mean, maybe they're going to put a canal in there and we can unload boats there, or maybe there's a massive gold mine that's going to happen in North Star. But I've got an inkling that it's going to be sort of barley, canola, wheat, a little bit of cotton up the road. But that's not where it's supposed to go. And now we have this sort of idiocy of two halves of a ship, and they're going to try and float them both without sticking them together. It's just incredible. To make it work, we need to go from Narromine across to Narrabri. That is through the Pilliga scrub, right? Not through the Daintree, not across, you know, some sort of pristine rainforest, through the Pilliga scrub. But, you know, it's the environmental issues. It's this, it's that, it's something else. What it really is, the Labor Party.
Yeah, but the problem is, Barnaby, I'll just jump in here. The problem is, yet again, I mean, a lot of our wealth comes out of regional Australia, but regional Australia gets done over. City people drive on country roads. People in our capital cities should care about getting all those big road trains off our country regional highways onto these freight lines. It's good for commerce. On every level, you mentioned the towns there, on every level it's a good project. You know, we've got a federal government now obsessed about a space division in defence. Why are we even talking about going into space in Australia when we can't even build a bloody rail line?
They want to go into space, but they can't go out to Narrabri. It's just, that's the Labor Party. And you look at it, if you go through your history, the development of Texas, which has got an economy vastly bigger than Australia's, they said, people used to think it was oil, but if you go into the history, it was actually the railway lines that became the impetus for the further economic growth. Same thing in China. What we have here is trains that will be about 3.2 kilometres long, ultimately, going at about 110 kilometres an hour, double stacked. Now, each one of those stacks, each one of those containers is a truck off the road. And each one of those is a reason for the further economic growth. And, you know, this is what we've got to do. And I say to your listeners, look at your shirt. Your shirts come from overseas. Your ties come from overseas. Your phones come from overseas. Your television's from overseas. Somebody somewhere must be putting something on a boat and sending it in the other direction for those goods to come in. and they are in regional Australia. That's your coal miners, your gas, your cotton, your cattle, your grain. They're the products that people overseas want to buy off us. They don't buy your bank. They don't buy banks. They don't buy accountants. They don't buy solicitors. They buy cotton, coal, beef, iron ore, gold, wool, mutton. They're the things. And you need an inland rail to move these things to a port so you can be wealthy.
Hey, just quickly, these Yes donations come out today, the details out. About $50 million spent by woke corporates and others on the Yes campaign, about $15 million on the No. But the Yes got a walloping. Does this show how out of touch corporate boardrooms are?
Absolutely, and also peak bodies. I mean, I hope Brad Benucci, whatever his name is, why didn't you reach into your own pocket for that money? They see, you can always be such a big man at the sale yards with somebody else's checkbook, but all these people put in their shareholders' money. And the super funds, did you go and talk to your super funds about, we're going to donate to the Yes guys? But, oh no, they're so virtuous with someone else's checkbook.
Oh, just on that, the car dealers, I know you're fired up about the cost of electric vehicles hitting SUVs and utes, which are, big issues for regional people. But the car dealerships were out today saying it'll be about $1 billion in these EV costs, and they are saying we're going to have to pass this on to consumers. Again, this is the cost that the government hasn't factored in for ordinary people, is it?
Yeah, well, and this is why the polling's tanking. This is Peter Pan economics. Like, we're going to have EVs. If we went here, how am I going to get an EV ute up the hills with 500 litres of water on it for spraying blackberries? I mean, it's just this illogical thing. We're going to cover the place up with swindle factories, wind farms, swindle factories and solar factories and transmission lines, and chase this sort of Peter Pan economics, while we have every major manufacturing, our aluminium, our plastics, basically you name it, refining, all running for the door because our energy prices are too high. We're absolutely driving this economy into the ground, and EVs is just another classic example of how completely and utterly distracted and disjointed they are from the realities that the people at the checkout and the people trying to pay their power bills are experiencing.
Spot on, Barnaby. Joyce, I'll leave it there. Great to have your company as always. Thanks, Barney.